All right, I want to talk a little bit about the heart. Like this, I want to make you, hopefully, understand the heart a little bit better, why it matters so much. For the longest time, we saw the heart just as a muscle that pumps blood. Right? It beats, pumps blood, we're done. And the only time it was talked about differently was really in a romantic way of my heart is broken or things like this, right? But it turns out the heart is way more than that. The heart, by the way, just so you know, is also its own nervous system. Right? It's called the intrinsic cardiac nervous system. And for example, it sends a pulse, an electric pulse, at specific intervals in order to establish a rhythm for the body, like a metronome. You know, when you play piano and you have the metronome, well, the heart is a metronome for the body. And I'm not talking about the heartbeat themselves, because that's coming later. I'm just talking about that electrical discharge that the heart has to set a rhythm for the body. How important is that, right? So we saw also, so the heart as a nervous system of its own, which means by that, it sends signals up and down the body and is very much linked to the parasympathetic and sympathetic side, things like this. Actually, the heart represents the first hierarchy of the entire system, which is logical because if the heart stops, we die, right? So as a hierarchy, the signal coming from the heart are extremely important. But when we say signals, the heart beats, and then what else? Well, it turns out a lot. So, for example, the heart beats. That's a fact. So whether a bit slower or faster is an indication for the body. That's one. But the space in between the beats also matters. You know, like the heart is like tum 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 tum, right? But that space in between the two actually matters a lot. That's what the HRV is based on, is measuring that. So the information in the silence in between the two, the time period in between those two beats, have actually of a crucial importance. So I found that very interesting just on that. There's more coming, but just on that alone, it reminds me of language, right? You cannot have a language if you don't have a stop in between the sounds. If all the sounds were connected, it would make no sense. You could never express anything. So it turns out that the breaks in between the sounds is what enables language, really. Because when we talk about tone of voices, like am I going up or down, like all those little nuances is what makes a language a language. So in music, they call that playing the silences. If you've learned piano or the violin, in the violin, they talk about it all the time. Play the silences. It matters as much as the sound that you make. So what we'll see really when we study the heart is that the heart is a violin player. It has to play the silences. It's very, very important. So that, for example, in that case, it will be the time between the heartbeats. Not the heartbeat themselves, but the two. Right? That time sends a lot of signal to the entire body, to the brain. The brain will react in ways that you don't understand because they're not conscious, but will react to that time. Again, linked to the HRV, right? Heart rate variability. That's what it means. It's a time between those two, amongst other things. But there's also like the amount of blood, so the strength with which the heart sends the blood, right? That blood pressure, that matters a lot. Like whether the heart tries to send a lot of blood at one time or not is not just low or high blood pressure. It's not just that. It's an information being sent to the brain as well. They are connection. I'll link the studies and show all this, but they are deep connection between, for example, the force of the blood being pumped out of the heart and connection to the brain. Like there's literally receptors, right? Whose only job is to monitor the strength at which the heart is pumping the blood so that it can tell to the brain that something is happening and things like this. So the heart represents the first hierarchy out of all 8, and it talks directly to some part of the brain. So it's not just that the heart sends that signal to the body, it talks to specific part of the brain directly, just giving it very specific information. So if you look at playing the violin, it'd be that, like how slow am I going over the chord? How hard am I going over the chord? Those are exactly the same thing the heart does. How hard am I pushing the blood? what is the time in between the silences that I'm playing. The heart, like this, is a violin player for the entire body. It is the first hierarchy and of the utmost importance. Do you know that the heart, for example, also produces its own hormones, right? So it's a brain in itself. He has neurons, and those neurons produce hormones. The heart produces oxytocin. Like it produces a number of hormone, monoamine neurotransmitter that are extremely important for the whole system. So the heart is his own brain. It's his own nervous system. It's the first hierarchy, right? And the one that the body listens to the most, because if anything happens to the heart, you die. So the strongest, when we talk about interoception, done many podcasts on that, the number one signal of interoception is the heart. So I want you to understand that you can make no mistake about this. The heart is a violin player and is the lead violin player of the orchestra, which means it's the one musician that decides what everybody else is doing. It is the most important musician of the orchestra. It's the lead violin player and it's the heart. Things that affect the heart will affect you on levels that are not conscious most of the time, but that will change everything from behavior to physiology. It's the number one violin player, and we need to understand the heart as such if we want to understand nutrition or behavior better, because at the seat of all this is the heart. Thank you.